I declare that carried. We now come to item number 11, which is the proposed new navigation bylaw and the bylaw panel report. I'll ask Councillor Cooper to move that. I don't think Councillor Collins is online with us, so I'll ask somebody to second that, Councillor Mulholland, and we've got our officers at the end of the table, Paul Wilson, and also Harbour Master Andrew Hayton. Welcome to our Harbour Master. And we'll ask, I think, Linda, if you would like to introduce the item, and then I'll come back to Paul and Andrew.
So, Glenn's here. So, first of all, I want to thank very much Member Glenn Wilcox and Councillor Efeso Collins for their real diligence and interest and good decision-making skills on the panel. I want to be a bit nerdy and say how enjoyable the whole process was, especially having Andrew, the Harbour Master, and the Deputy Harbour Master Christian with us, so that we could fully interrogate all the sort of permutations and implications of any decisions we made and really sense check what we were doing. It was actually really satisfying, and it was great to have you on board. I want to thank Paul for his leadership, and Ferretti and Bailey for doing the bulk of the work. The process was excellent, and also we were able to, the most pressing issue for people was increasing speed in the harbour, and we were able to take that on board and just be able to say, look, with the exemptions that the Harbour Master can give for ferries, we could keep that speed at what it was, but there was exemptions so we could make sure we met public transport times, and that there's always an option for him to give an exemption. So we were able to kind of meet most of those concerns. So really, we had a good lot of public consultation, not a lot of face-to-face engagement, but a lot of online submissions and some really good stakeholder feedback in this room here. So I commend the recommendations to you, and I'll hand back to you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and can I also acknowledge IMSP member Glenn Wilcox. Thank you for the work that you did on this, Glenn, and you're also available for comment. Paul and Andrew, are there any comments that you'd like to make in addition to what Councillor Cooper has outlined?
No, nothing further to add.
No. Fine. Glenn, nothing from you?
Yeah. Oh, you got to get your $3 million worth.
Yeah, exactly.
So just in relation to this navigation bylaw, one of the things we have done and we noticed from the last one was that life jackets are compulsory in Auckland unless you're told to take them off. And there seems to be a kind of a corridor going around that you don't have to put it on. Well, actually, no, that's wrong. You must be asked to take them off when it's safe to do so by your captain or whoever's in charge. If there's no one in charge, then you're going to wear them. So I think that's really important. I'd also like to bring your attention to the mandatory requirement for life jackets over bars, which is the Kaipara and the Manukau, as well as the requirement to have a VHF. They can go to channel 16 when crossing either of those two bars. This is in direct result of basically the drownings that we had in Kaipara over that time a few years back, where we lost, I think, 9 or 10 people. So we've really made it really strong now that you must have VHF when crossing our bars. And finally, is I just bring your attention to paragraph 22, which is in the Māori impact statement. The bylaw may or not be impacted by the Marine and Coastal Areas Act. We don't think so, but if it does, we just needed to highlight that, bring that to your attention to understand that the exclusivity of the use of the harbours and the moana is always going to be tempered by any act that may come in through a treaty claim. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn, and I think that was a point worth making. Many recreational boaties aren't aware of the fact that you wear the life jacket unless you're invited by the skipper to take it off. So it's worth reminding people of that. We're not changing the bylaw in that relation. And the other key thing in this is, I think by unanimous decision, the question of the speed staying at 12 knots, and I think by the majority of submitters to it. Are there any questions at this point? Questions only, just to clarify. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Question one is, how many deaths have we had since the bylaw was first discussed? I think it was several years ago, and I remember that because both Councillor Casey and I were on that with yourself. So how many deaths have we had, or drowning, sorry, have we had since then, especially with those that were not wearing the PFD?
Thank you. Through the chair, the numbers that I'm about to tell you do have limitations. They're not specifically related to the wearing of personal flotation devices. These are more generic numbers about fatalities. So what we do know is that like for recreational vessels, that in general in Auckland, the number of injuries have reduced from a high of 18 in 2016 to 14 in 2019. So the numbers are very low. We also know that fatalities, for instance, for people of Maori descent have also reduced in line with national figures as well.
But just to clarify, there have been drownings. Yeah, so one's too much. Just clarification, and that clarification is on page 93, feedback on personal flotation devices. And the clarification is the first bullet point under key changes sought, and it's to remove the exemption. So can I clarify that there was a rule in there that they had to be worn, and we are now removing that exemption?
Through the chair, where the proposed bylaw retains exactly the same rule as is currently in place, and that was first put in place in 2014. So there's no change into that rule. Okay,
and through you, Your Worship, I just got one last question, and that is, the responsibility is for the captain of the vessel or whoever is in charge of the vessel in regards to the PFD, the wearing of it. And you've got in their panel recommendations that it has to be considered around the experience or swimming capability. If we have a situation with the children on there saying, yeah, look, I can swim, no problems at all, captain obviously weighs that up and makes a decision as to whether that person can take the PFD off. Like there's no look, can you tell me where you've got, or even before we end up, that's the responsibility of the captain. So if the child or under 16 ends up saying, hey, look, yeah, no, I can swim, what issues would we end up facing then?
Yeah, through the chair, the master of a vessel's always responsible for everybody on board.
Thank you, Chair, and I reserve the right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thanks, Your Worship. I've got a couple of questions. First, what is the fine, or what happens to people who do not comply with the bylaw? What's the stick?
So depending on the nature of the offence to the chair, there are infringement fines, and we have been working quite closely with the government department responsible for passing those regulations. And just a point of to clarify that this new bylaw will come into place once those infringements are passed by that central agency.
We know what they are?
Yeah, through the chair, $200 is the fine at the moment.
$200 if you don't wear a life jacket.
$200 for pretty much every fine. I think a couple of them are $100, but for not wearing your life jacket is $200.
Do you think that's an appropriate level for a life?
That's set by central government.
Right. Okay. My next question is, so point 7 in the summary, you say that once, if this passes today, you'll publicly notify the decision. Do we send a note to all boating clubs, etc., recreational boating clubs based throughout the region?
Through the chair, we can look to do that as part of a general awareness. What we do as a bare minimum is to make sure that we publicly notify the decision. Typically, that can be through our Auckland. We will notify every person that made that provided feedback as well, which will include those boating clubs that made feedback to us.
I suppose the point I'm making, Your Worship, is that if we know that there are a number of people, for example, who don't wear a life jacket, who should, and this, the bylaw's been around for a while, what are we doing about improving the awareness around that, and who are we working with to make sure that information is more publicly known?
I'll make that a question.
Through the chair, so I can clarify what I was on what I said earlier. The bylaw panel actually specifically asked staff outside of its decision to communicate to organisations such as Drowning Prevention Auckland, Water Safe New Zealand, and the Safer Boating Forum to promote that very message of that people must wear the life jacket first and only take it off if the master or the person in charge says it's okay.
Last question, I'm sorry. Would it be okay if we as councillors work through our local boards, who obviously know our local clubs, who know the local clubs in our area, to help them assist with getting the message out?
Thank you very much. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, probably a question towards the Harbour Master, Andrew. Just trying to get a feel for I think you're resourced through Auckland Transport, aren't you? So in terms of your staffing that you have or vacancies, can you give us a feel for where you're sitting at in terms of numbers that you desire and numbers that you have?
Yeah, through the chair, we've got 15 positions in our team. We've got 2 vacancies at the moment. We haven't recruited those vacancies over the winter period because it's our quieter period, but we'll be back up to full strength come the summer.
And Andrew, is that level is it 15 in total? Is that something you're seeking to increase, or is that a level that you can enforce this bylaw at?
Yeah, we can never have too many people to do what we've got to do, but I'm comfortable with the numbers at the moment. As Auckland grows and parts of the region that get further developed, we will need to increase as the years progress, but for the time being, we're okay.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, Councillor Christabi.
Thanks, Mayor. Just under section, 7, I think, a person must be at least 15 years old to operate a power-driven vessel, and then there's a definition of power-driven. Just a question on this. This technology is changing really quickly. There are now kayaks with little electric motors that take you out a little bit further into better fishing grounds. There's a New Zealand company developing a marine bicycle, and that will ultimately have a small electric motor. And I'm just thinking of the, prohibiting 15-year-olds from actually being able to enjoy an electric power-driven kayak, because a kayak is identified as a vessel. And under this, they wouldn't be allowed by law. It appears they wouldn't be allowed. Same for the electric bicycle, but they can go and jump in their local yacht club Hobie cap and rip across the water at 20 knots plus. Can you just reconcile those two? Are we at risk of prohibiting fun and accessibility and new mobility in that definition?
Yeah, through the chair. The problem we face is that there's a requirement under the Maritime Transport Act that bylaws cannot be inconsistent with national maritime rules, and the national maritime rule says you're 15 for a power-driven vessel, and we're not allowed to be inconsistent with those. So that would have to become from a maritime rule change at national level.
Great. Well, thank you very much for those answers. So I can ask the panel to retire from the table. It's very good to get very clear and specific answers. So thank you very much. And Andrew, thank you for appearing before our committee as well. We now come to comments. Are there any comments that Councillor Filipaina, I think, were you want?
Thank you, Bishop. Look, firstly, I want to acknowledge all the work that has been done, and Councillor Cooper's done this, to everybody that has gone through in our panel. Your Worship, 2012 was when there were 3 that had lost their lives at the Manukau at Margate Bridge. My role at the time was the Pacific liaison in the police, and I was asked to go down there when the tragedy happened, and also had to return there when the father was found 2 days later. So was there when he was located. I would love to have our life jackets compulsory. I can understand the dilemma that the panel, as well as our staff, would go through. I can also understand what Paul has said, that, look, this is the drownings. We can't separate those who have drowned as a result of not wearing a life jacket. But one life lost as a result of not wearing a life jacket in 2012 was a classic in regards to that. I wish we could, and I know we can't, because seeing the family and seeing the bodies that were retrieved from the Manukau, and I remember saying this earlier around other discussions, that will never leave me. And I just don't want any of that to be seen by other people. But at some stage, my issue is around having the decision not to wear a life jacket with the person who is going to be in charge of the vessel. That's my concern. And I know that at some stage we will, when this gets reviewed again, have an issue around that. And Councillor Simpson mentioned the local board assisting our communities and getting the message out. Well, that's what happened in regards to the last time we reviewed the navigational bylaw. That will continue to happen when we get Water Safe New Zealand, Drowning Prevention Auckland. So, Your Worship, really for me, I hope before I leave council, I just hope that at some stage there's some common sense from my perspective that is compulsory. In the event, we know that up north, with some again the families who lost their lives with the bar, it just happened very, very quickly, and that's really for me is what I want to try and avoid. What all of us want to try and avoid. So, Your Worship, look, we're in a hard position, but for me that's really my talanoa for today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor, and I can appreciate the trauma that you had to deal with at that time. Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you. I haven't quite recovered from my embarrassment of jumping ahead on the agenda, but I just did want to just make the comment as co-chair of the Hauraki Golf Forum, just quickly, and thank you, Matua Alf, for your comments in terms of the seriousness of these bylaws, but not a but. In addition, I just wanted to make the comment from the Hauraki Golf Forum perspective that we're pleased to see this outcome because of the impact on the brooders particularly, and in 2015 there was a voluntary speed reduction put in place to 10 knots for all commercial and cruise vessels, and since then there haven't been any fatalities. So that's a really massive success story, one of the big success stories for the marine park. So I just wanted to highlight that. So we were very concerned if there was any proposal to increase the speeds. So thank you to the work of the hearing panel and all those who've contributed to this. And it was also significant for the forum that we just are trying to be far more proactive in our advocacy, and this is an example of that. So kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, councillor. I have no further requests for comments, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. We come to item number 12, which is group remuneration policy. And if I can ask Bronwyn Hall,